Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we are taking a look at the roster for the Washington Justice, a very interesting team from last year. They have completely overhauled their roster after a mid-season kind of shake-up for this roster that saw them get rid of some of their players like Happy and Mag and Vigilante. And so end of the season, they did not perform to the kind of standard that you would have wanted to see from them, but they did finish the season with a 11-13 record, -4 differential. A couple of tournament appearances. All in all, an overall kind of solid team for most of the year. Pretty average. Never really kind of terrible, but also never really all that good, never all that impressive. And so it was an interesting season for them last year. Major shakeups. Their entire staff is gone. So very, very different team going into 2023. So let's take a look at their new roster and kind of break it down, share some of my thoughts on it, and kind of what they are as we go into the future for this team. The roster here, you can see it. You have ATVI and Flora in the DPS line, Ben Best and Mirror as their two tanks, and FD God and Teru as their supports. So a whole bunch of Overwatch League veterans. Every person on this team, at the very least, has been in the Overwatch League. Varying different levels of success for the guys on this team, but pretty decent squad. Back it up, of course, with a coaching staff of Get Amazed as the head coach, J-Mac as the assistant coach, Danny as the analyst. Danny, formerly with the Atlanta Reign. Get Amazed and J-Mac worked together on the 2021 Paris Eternal, so bringing that kind of back together kind of help bridge the gap between your Western and Korean players. It's an interesting roster. It's a very, very unique team. And so let's talk about it. Let's break it down. Let's get into my thoughts on this team. We're going to start from the top with the DPS. And so, of course, we are starting with ATVI and Flora. Only 2 DPS on this team, which I think could be an issue. I do like both ATVI and Flora. I think they're both good players. I don't really think the 2 of them alone are going to be like hyper flexible enough and definitely able to like cover everything you need for them to cover. But I do think they're really good players. I think they're solid pieces. But I don't know if they're if either of them is what I would kind of want as my number one, DPS player. Like last year on New York, Flora was the number 2. Last year, ATVI was the number 2 with Shy on the Hangzhou Spark. Now they're both number 1. So we'll see if either of them can really take that kind of leadership role as your number 1 guy. But they do have at least complementary hero pools. ATVI going to be more of your kind of projectile flex DPS player. We saw him play a very, very good Tracer last year. We also saw some Genji out of him in the Genji metas. He did split some time down the stretch with Pineapple. He played a bit on that more hit scan centered role. So we know ATVI is not favored in a hit scan role, but he can play Tracer if that is kind of what they need in kind of a Tracer hit scan meta, Tracer Widow or Tracer Ashe, Tracer Cassidy, Tracer Sojourn, whatever. And Flora can play that hit scan, and he can also play the Tracer. So if you're in a Tracer Genji meta, you're not kind of at a point like you had kind of sometimes in the past with Yaki when he was on Florida, for example, when you had a Tracer Genji meta and he was your best Tracer and your best Genji. That's not really an issue with this team. There are definitely still some potential issues with kind of flexibility. Like I said, ATVI is not someone that I would say is a high-level hit scan player. Like I said, he plays Tracer. I don't really think we saw much from him in terms of the hard hit scan last year, if any at all. It's not what he's known for. And there was a point in time where Pineapple, I believe, played the Tracer over him. So reasons to be hesitant, but 2 players in ATVI and Flora that I do rate very highly. And I think they're both talented. I think Flora got a bad rap for the past couple of years. I think he was one of the only parts of that New York roster that was salvageable, both 2021 and 2022. And ATVI, I think, had a very good, at least start to the year last year in Hangzhou. He kind of started to disappear a little bit as the season went on, but I also think that Hangzhou as a team disappeared in the second half, so not entirely on him. But 2 players I like. I wish they had another guy here. I wish they had another DPS player, another hit scan player, just to kind of be able to round out some of the weaknesses that are on this team. But all in all, I do like what they have here. I think these two are good, and I think they're pretty solid. And I think, generally speaking, they'll be able to get you to some wins. They'll be able to kind of be a very solid DPS duo to kind of lead the way for the team, which is, I think, the team's strength is this DPS duo. I think they're the two best players on the team. I think they're the two players that the team are going to rely on the most, and so I think that's good. I'm a little concerned about the kind of language stuff with this team. ATVI has put in a mixed roster. Obviously played with Hangzhou last year, and so there's Chinese and Korean players in that roster, and my understanding is that they speak English. But I don't think Flora has ever played in a mixed roster. Obviously, Vulcan spent some time in New York last year, but I don't think he... That doesn't count. He was on New York for the past 2 years. They were all Korean. He comes from Korean contenders, so certainly an area of at least some concern, but I think when you have JMac as a coach, you have, that kind of connection at the very least, I think that you have some work and help in that regard. And also, Ben Best, Mir, FD God, Teru, they've all played on mixed rosters before, so most of this team has. So it's really just Flora that hasn't, so I don't think it's too big of a deal. I think he'll be fine, but just something to note with that at the very least. Let's move on now to the tanks, which I think are the most interesting two players on this team, because we have Ben Best and Mir. Ben Best, of course, was the tank for the Paris Eternal in 2019 and 2020. Was a part of the team when they won that 2020 Summer Showdown. Did pretty well in the Countdown Cup. So he was an important part of the team for that time. Then he went into contenders, went to Young and Beautiful, Team Peps, and now finds his way back to the Washington Justice. He's one of the older, if not the oldest players in the Overwatch League, 27. Something just to kind of at least make note of, if for no other reason than just kind of remembering that a lot of younger talent kind of is replacing older talent quite often. So Ben Best kind of coming back into the league at 27. Good for him. Happy to see him kind of make his return. He's a player that I was pretty down on in 2019. I didn't really think he was all that good in 2019. I was kind of shocked when they brought him back in 2020. I wouldn't say I was shocked. I wasn't that excited by it, but I thought he actually played very, very well in 2020. I thought he was a one of the most improved players in my opinion from 2019 to 2020. Similar to Hadi last year. Maybe not quite as dramatic of a shift. I think he was probably better than Hadi was in his down season, but not quite as good as what Hadi ended up being in his best season. But similar. I think that's kind of the similar kind of vibe I got, where not a very good first season in my opinion, but a much better second season. So him coming back is definitely interesting. I think he's going to be an interesting player to watch. Team Peps has been around for a while. Obviously, he has a relationship with Get Amaze as a result of that. Get Amaze worked with Fefe for Team Peps to kind of put together a lot of French players. It's also where FD God was, so makes sense that they're on this roster when you kind of bring over the guy who was the coach for that roster. You're going to get some potential nepotism, some potentially just like bring in some guys that but these are also veterans, right? These are guys who know the league. They've been around. They're talented players. They've been at the high level. Ben Best, a little less than, say, FD God. I think Ben Best probably had some more issues to kind of that were part of the reason why he left. But to me, in a game where I think Ben Best has a good Reinhardt, he's got a pretty serviceable Winston. He's got a pretty good Orisa from what I remember. I mean, I don't know what his Overwatch 2 Orisa's like. I haven't watched him too much, but he was good. Obviously, Winston was not his strong suit. They would prefer to run No Smite in that kind of meta. But to me, if it's a hard off-tank meta, you're not going to really see a lot of Ben Best. You see a lot of Mirror anyway, which I haven't really talked about Mirror yet, of course. But Mirror played last year with Vancouver, and I thought he was good the majority of the time. I thought that when he played over False, the team, generally speaking, looked better. So I think him being on a flex tank role, off-tank role is pretty good. He also has history kind of running a bunch of different, he's played, his original was damage, he's also played, support. So he can kind of flex a lot, which I think on a 6-man roster is somewhat valuable. I would prefer they don't run him like a super, weird, flexible, constantly switching roles thing for this team, but I won't say it's impossible that happens, but I hope that that's not their strategy. But we saw him play Junker Queen last year. We saw him play Doomfist. We've seen him play Zarya historically. So if those are the metas that we get into, Mirror's, I think, in a good spot. He's played at least in the Overwatch 2 meta in the kind of current environment. And to me, Ben Best is the type of player that you just give him the ability to kind of play his tank picks. I think he'll be fine. I think you kind of know what he wants to do and what you kind of get out of him. And I think you're going to be fine. It's not my favorite duo in the league. It's definitely on the kind of lower end in terms of just name and kind of my initial kind of reaction. I don't think they're bad. I think they're very kind of average. And in a region that looks pretty good, like the Western region, average could be definitely on the lower end. But, we haven't really seen stuff for the LA Valiant or New York Excelsior yet. There's been some rumors and stuff like that. I definitely feel more confident about this, about Ben Best and Mirror than I do about the rumors for both the Valiant and New York. And I think I like these two also better than what we have in Vegas, which we haven't talked about Vegas yet. But at least those three, I think this duo is better than. And so, at the very least, they give me... This is not an instance where I think these are going to be terrible players, right? I think they're average. They're league average at worst. And in the right metas, I think they could be really good. If we got a hard Rhine meta, yeah, Ben Best can rival someone like Hadi on the Reinhardt, right? And just kind of his historical play, right? And so depending on what we see going forward, right? And Hadi's a great example of another tank that if there are rumors, of course, about the London Spitfire picking up some other players, but there's not a rumor about them picking up an off tank. If there's an off tank meta, I'd feel way better having Mirror on my team than I would having just Hadi. So there are teams that this tank duo will be, I think, better than in certain metas where I think they'll kind of thrive. But like I said, Ben Best hasn't been in the league for the past 2 years. So definitely the level of competition that he's been around recently is altered by the fact that he hasn't been kind of playing at the biggest stage. But last time we saw him, he was also playing on a lot on ping, on no land, stuff like that. So, he could definitely improve, and he definitely could prove me wrong. But I think the tank line is probably the area that it's not the part that I'm the most concerned about, because I think that at the very least they can cover everything you need to cover. But to me, this just feels very like treading water with tank line as opposed to tanks that make me feel very, excited or just feel like this is like one of those things where I'm like, yeah, this seems in a really good spot with the tank line. But I spent enough time talking about the tanks. Let's move on to the supports, which are probably the most interesting part of this roster. Obviously, the damage duo, 2 Korean players. The tank line, I don't want to say 2 Western players because Mir is originally from Vietnam, or he's Vietnamese. But I know he's a Western player in terms of the type of players he's usually kind of been playing with. And he lived in Europe for a time, so Western by proxy. The support line is where you have a Western player and a Korean player together, and it's an interesting one to look at for sure, because he is with the support line. I said I didn't even mention who yet. You got FD God, of course, role star in 2020 for his play on the Paris Eternal, his main support play, his Lucio play in particular. Absolutely unbelievable. I still think he's one of the best Lucios we've ever seen in terms of just pure mechanical kind of understanding of the hero. He's still among the best to ever play in the Overwatch League. I think that he got a really bad rap on the Shock in 2021. I think he was better than what a lot of people kind of gave him credit for. That team had a lot of problems beyond just FD God. A lot of people blamed. Even Nero got a lot of flack for that team. It wasn't just them. If you think that Nero and FD God were the only problem with that team, I think you're wrong, but not to get too caught up in that. So to me, FD God is a very good player. I still think he absolutely deserves a shot in the Overwatch League. I think he deserves a spot on a team, especially if we get a ton of Lucio play like we might be getting. I feel pretty good about him, and I think he's one of those players that on Lucio, I definitely put FD God kind of among the kind of upper echelon, of Lucio players we've ever seen in the Overwatch League, right? He was a role star in 2020. Like, you cannot take that away from him. He was very, very good on that 2020 Eternal roster with Ben Best, right? So he has experience kind of playing with some of these guys, with Ben Best mainly. So that's a really good thing to kind of see. And I think that he is a player that I don't worry about FD God's play. I think he's going to be fine. The support line as a duo is definitely where I start to get a little bit more concerned, because you have Teru as your flex support, and he hasn't been playing flex support for a super long time. He's been playing it for a bit. Obviously, he played with the Spark last year on the role. He played with Team Diamond last year. That's where he kind of first made the transition after being a DPS player with Vancouver. So he's certainly someone who we saw kind of play a very good Kiriko in the playoffs last year. But overall, I've been somewhat unimpressed by his kind of overall level of play. I think he is fine. I think you're going to get decent play out of him. But I don't get super excited by the prospect of Teru, especially since we've really only seen him excel on one flexport here at the Overwatch League level with Kiriko. And so I definitely have a little bit more concern there. So this support line gives me some hesitation. I wish they had another flex support at the very least, not necessarily a different flex support, just a kind of another guy just in case, just someone else to kind of come in there and potentially fill in if needed. But they opted just to run Teru and FD God, which I know there was some stuff about trialing with different players with this team. So I know there's some other interest on some other players at certain points. I believe there was someone linked to this team. I don't remember who off the top of my head, but someone like pretty good that people were kind of surprised wasn't getting a spot in the league. But I'm drawing a blank on who that was off the top of my head. It was Iris that was linked to this team for a time, which I think Iris would have been a better signing. But to me, Teru kind of gives you a lot of good Kiriko. And if Kiriko's as meta as she's been recently, well, then I'm going to say you're probably fine. If Kiriko remains a must-pick hero, then this team will be in a decent spot. If it's a Kiriko Lucio meta, which I don't know if it will be, I think Ana has been meta recently. I think Kiriko Ana has been a pretty big meta, which if that is the case, I don't love FD God for the Ana, but I look at this team and I see a very solid kind of group of players that don't inspire me in the sense of like they're going to excel in the league, but they're all people that we've seen play and kind of do, average to well throughout the course of their careers. So it's a roster that I look at on kind of paper and on name value, and I say this is a roster that kind of checks a lot of the boxes for what I like in players. Right? I'm a fan of the guys that they got, but I don't love this group together as a full unit. So we'll see how they kind of perform as a group. I definitely have concerns about this roster. I think they're on the lower end of teams going into 2023, but I certainly feel better about them than I do some of the other teams in the region who everything we've seen or heard about them makes me concerned greatly, right? I trust these guys to be consistent. I trust the guys to kind of come in, show up and play, and I think they're a team that you can't just roll up, no preparation and roll over, right? They're not going to be a team like that. They're going to be significantly better than any, team in the past. Like they're not going to be like Paris last year or New York last year, where it was just like a literal automatic win against those teams pretty much. They're not that bad, and they're not even close to that bad. They're significantly better than that. So I like what they've done in kind of an individual level. I really want to see what this team does as a unit because I have concerns about kind of bringing this roster together. But like I said, talent is certainly there. They don't have a lot of like glaring holes, just maybe some areas that I think they have potential, unknowns rather than holes. So it's interesting. I am very curious to see where this roster goes in the 2023 season, and definitely one of the rosters I will be keeping my eyes on the most. So that is really it for my thoughts on this roster. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on this roster. I think this is a very interesting one, so I really want to hear your thoughts on this one. That's going to be all from me for today. Thank you all once again for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. Friday, we're talking about the Boston Uprising, one of the big rosters going to 2023. So that'll be fun. That'll be exciting. So if you want to make sure to see that when it comes out, subscribe for that. But that's all for today. Once again, thank you all. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.